Hello and welcome to Reject Modernity, Embrace Tradition, where we take you back to the good old days, just maybe not quite how you'd expect from our title. My name is Megan Cox.
I am Clayton Becker.
And Clayton, what is it that we will be talking about today?
Well, today, Megan, we're going to be talking about, we promise this title will make sense in a few moments. Reject Trump's forever dodge, embrace foreign policy. Now, I liked the little alliterative thing that we did there with the forever dodge and the foreign policy, but what does that actually mean, Megan? What's the episode actually about?
We're going to be talking about the lack of accountability and how the current administration is prosecuting its war against Iran.
And also just like the lack of transparency with how it's prosecuting its war against Iran. Both of these they're related issues, right? And that's what the forever dodge refers to. Just every single time you ask, basically, you get a different answer as to what the war is about. How is it going? When will it be over? Why did we start it in the first place? Like, it's just an endless series of maddeningly inconsistent statements from Trump, from his officials, from really anyone who you ask the question to. And so that's what we're going to be talking about.
It isn't really all that surprising that that's the attitude that this administration takes, because that's the attitude that this administration has taken in response to all kinds of different policy preferences. And quite frankly, in the campaign, they are governing as they campaigned, in which they are the jello that we are trying to nail to the wall. And so it is very, very difficult under any set of circumstances to hold an administration accountable when they have a different answer for every different questioner. But when it comes to foreign policy specifically, this is a point where I think we really can't let it slide anymore, that there is no accountability, apparently, no transparency in what's going on. We and Congress do not have the ability to actually hold this administration accountable at all.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things to say there. The first thing that I'll say is I had not heard the nail the jello to the wall expression before, but it makes a lot more sense to me than heading for the alfalfa. Which Megan did say that her mom opined on and did explain. Hello, Megan's mom. Thank you for the explanation. It makes sense now. I understand the very rich legumes that they might be running towards and which could cause sickness if consumed in large quantities. But the second and more serious thing to say about that is that the choice of Congress, I think, is that they aren't going to hold the Trump administration accountable here, right? Like, it's not that they can't, it's that they have chosen not to. And we're going to get into sort of why that is a little bit later in the episode. But just to start us off, if somehow you haven't been paying attention to what's been going on in the Middle East, or if you've just sort of like tuned it out because of all of the other stuff that's going on in other parts of the world, let's sort of give you a brief, hopefully not too oversimplified rundown of where we are. Megan and I tried to record an episode about this, like I think a month ago or so at this point, and things were sort of like not exactly in a different place, but like it was a lot less clear, like that they were gonna stay in that like place that they're in right now.
Yeah. There was a much higher risk of escalation when we last discussed this, and we had some technical difficulties which saved us from ourselves really on that episode, but it seems as though we've just solidified in the current stalemate.
Yeah.
And knock on wood, who knows what's going to happen between recording and airing of this episode. But
I mean, we've had a
have
discussion in the past, right, about have we considered that our episodes may be causing global geopolitical events? Probably not, right? But essentially where we find ourselves now is Iran's control of the Strait of Hormuz is like arguably stronger than it has ever been. Charging tolls, closing down the strait entirely. Like, these are things that Iran did not do before. No matter how much the Trump administration seemingly wants to pretend that they were doing these things before and that the war was about opening the Strait of Hormuz, which, like, whatever.
That's some serious retconning.
Yeah, like literally, like the definition of retconning. That's, I guess, the biggest thing perhaps to think about here with regards to like global geopolitical consequences. Additional geopolitical consequences: global oil markets are like still in like a, I would say, reasonable degree of chaos, right? Like it could have gotten a lot worse than it has, and there are some reasons for that, which we're not going to get into in this episode just for time reasons. But gas prices are still really high, both in the United States and around the world. The United States is more insulated from these price spikes and shortages than much of the rest of the world is, because we just don't get very much of our oil from the Middle East, from the Persian Gulf. So as bad as like things are with regards to like prices and shortages here in the United States, they are worse around the world, and that could over time magnify into other geopolitical events and ramifications, but we just haven't seen it quite yet. American partners in the Middle East, with the exception of Israel, because they wanted the United States to do this, right? Yeah. We're also not going to get into that, not going to open that particular can of worms in this episode. But the rest of American allies, partners, people with whom we have real relationships in the Middle East are kind of like, what the actual fuck, guys? What was that? Particularly the other states around the Persian Gulf that found themselves suddenly, sucked into the early phase of this conflict, where Iran was
on the receiving end.
Yeah, where Iran was like launching missiles and stuff into their buildings and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then this is, less like global geopolitics consequence and more like internal consequence in Iran. It seems as though the Iranian regime is perhaps even more consolidated in power over the country than it was previously. Obviously, much of the previous leadership structure was killed in the initial American strikes, but the people who were, like in the, I don't want to call it like the underbelly of the regime, but like sort of the backbenchers maybe of the regime, seemingly have stepped in without like really all that much of a problem in terms of like continuity of government. The son of the Ayatollah is the new Ayatollah, right? Like there isn't seemingly the possibilities for regime change insofar as that was like the goal of the Trump administration here. And we're going to, again, talk about what their actual goal was, if they even had one. Like that doesn't seem like it's going to be happening. And if anything, it seems to have made things worse if you're someone who wants to see regime change in Iran, which, again, another thing that we could talk about, but we're not going to get into too deeply here, since this is an America-focused podcast. And just, it would make the episode messier and annoying, and we don't want to.
Very, 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 very long.
Yeah.
We know some of you like to listen to us talk. That's why you're here. But at a certain point, we do have to cut ourselves off.
And of course, we don't have 4 hours on we're actually recording this on a Wednesday afternoon. This is rare for us, but it's because we have other stuff going on this week. Anyway, long story short. The things
we do for you all.
long story short, there's many things that this conflict has caused so far. That's more or less where we are. And now we're going to talk to you about like why the fuck it all happened, and like why the lack of transparency and accountability are such a big deal. So, Megan, do you want to take it, like, as the resident lawyer on the podcast, explain why some of these things are like big deals from like a governance and constitution perspective?
Absolutely. So, it might not seem that surprising that a president is off doing his own thing in terms of a military intervention if your sense of history begins in the 1990s or even in the 1950s. You might think, well, of course, the president's doing what the president does. The president's commander-in-chief in the military. That's not how our Constitution was set up. The United States Constitution splits the authority over the military between the legislative and executive branches, while the president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, Congress has the power to declare war. perceived at the time of the founding as a necessary precondition for the president's use of authority over the military. So this was supposed to be a multi-step process. Congress was supposed to declare war, say, yes, we are going to go to war against the British, the Spanish, etc. And then the president prosecutes that war and exercises those powers as a commander in chief. This worked very well up until the early 20th century for a number of reasons. It takes time to mobilize your forces, put them on a ship, and send them to France, Cuba, wherever. And in that time, Congress can authorize military intervention. There's also very little concern about the element of surprise in these sorts of large-scale military interventions. You are not doing what we see today where it's, a quick little Delta Force drop and then you scurry home, etc. You are deploying massive forces over time. And those massive forces also have to be gathered up because you don't have a standing military at the time, at least not in the United States. Now, the world has gotten smaller since the founding, or at least more quickly accessible since the founding. So speed and secrecy have become relevant to military deployments. You now have a practice of maintaining a standing army, so you don't have to go and gather up your forces in the same way that we did, say, at the beginning of World War I. So you also have the possibility of secrecy where you're not broadcasting to the public that you are about to have this massive military intervention. So the world has changed. Clayton.
I also think it's relevant at this point, it's also just more possible for the United States to launch more kinds of military operations from different parts of the world because the United States has so many military bases in different areas, right? Prior to the middle of the 20th century, that really wasn't the case, right? And so if the United States wanted to get involved in World War II or World War I or the Spanish-American War or whatever, you had to send people from the United States to these places. Nowadays, we just have a standing military presence in basically every one of the states that rings Iran, right? And so it's not particularly difficult for the United States to launch that kind of military operation. And there's a certain degree here of yes, the world has changed, and that means that we're going to have some of our legal structures and what actions the president is allowed to take without the explicit authorization of Congress also change, right? And I think
we have a way to do that.
Yeah,
there's a way to do that.
We have a way to do that, and we'll talk about that as well. And also, yes. I think that one of the sort of underlying assumptions of the way that the system, let's say since the 1950s, right? An underlying assumption of the way that the system has run is that the United States president, while they have a much greater deal of authority over the military than historically they were held to have, the underlying assumption, the underlying agreement, as it were, between Congress and the presidency was that the president wasn't going to do things that were batshit crazy.
Assumption survived Richard Nixon, which is impressive.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about how Richard Nixon did some batshit crazy things, right? And a lot of the things that happened around Vietnam specifically are what give us our present legal structures, right?
Yes.
And we'll get to that in just a minute, right? But I think that the important thing to understand at this juncture, before we go into all of that, right, is that there are legal structures. The kinds of things that the president has historically been allowed to do without the express authorization of Congress has been these kind of more limited military engagements, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And broadly speaking, even if they do things without the authorization of Congress, Congress has agreed to, in a bipartisan manner in many, many respects, allowed them to continue those military operations through congressional authorization after the fact.
Yes.
That's where we stand.
That's where we stand. So relying on speed and secrecy as justifications, presidents from Truman onward have subverted Congress's role in the use of military force. And then in an effort to corral the executive after Vietnam, Congress passed the War Powers Act, which does create that framework by which the president could exercise authority over the military without a formal declaration of war.
Yeah, and this is, again, as we said, sort of like a response to the like really blatant excesses of Congress not having a lot of like transparency into American military operations in Vietnam, not having a lot of say, right? A lot of it happens like sort of as revelations come out about the executive's knowledge of the situation in Vietnam that they did not share with Congress, right? And so this creates these like structures that are in place to this day of the United States military. Like the president has the authority to do these things, but they have to do them in a certain way. They have to seek authority from Congress after the fact, so on and so forth. Megan, do you want to sort of maybe give us a bit of a rundown of like what some of those?
Yeah, there are reporting requirements. Yeah. So we have reporting requirements. So if the president introduces the use of the armed forces into hostilities, that needs to be reported within 48 hours in writing to the Speaker of the House of Representatives, the President pro tem of the Senate. They need to be engaging in that sort of transparency and communicating with Congress. Then the president is supposed to routinely consult with Congress until U.S. armed forces are no longer engaged in hostilities or have been removed. And the reports are given to the House Committee on Foreign Affairs and to the Senate Committee, Foreign Relations Committee. These guys are collectively sometimes known as the Gang of Eight. The majority, or the leaders, the chairs, I was going to get there eventually, the chairs of those two committees, as well as the ranking members of those two committees, the speaker, the president pro tem, then I think the minority leaders of both the House and the Senate are the Gang of Eight. These are the people the president is supposed to be engaging with. There needs to be some oversight. And it just doesn't appear that that's happening in this case.
Yeah, not really at all.
No. And the War Powers Act is in itself a little bit controversial in some ways. And I do want to acknowledge that because I will be complaining about it later. First of all, just side note, because I have a podcast and I can complain about things. The idea that we're going to embrace this extremely expansive version of executive power for commander-in-chief authority over the military is like the only place that some of these folks want to embrace the concept of a living constitution, and it cracks me up. Secondly, you could argue that, first of all, the War Powers Act usurps some executive authority. That is, in fact, what the Trump administration argues. They say they don't have to follow the War Powers Act because it impinges on the president's authority. Someone else might argue that Congress is unconstitutionally giving away its authority to declare war by passing the War Powers Act. So for every constitutional argument, there is an equal and opposite constitutional argument.
And of course,
I hope we have the chance to argue about them.
This goes back to our long-held belief here at this podcast that if you want to make that argument, you should just pass an amendment that makes things clearer and actually advances the like thing you're saying, rather than being like, look, it's already in the Constitution. But anyway, another piece of this, which I don't know, I may get this correct or wrong. I'm not sure if it's directly connected to the War Powers Act, is that Congress has the ability to either like approve or deny basically authorizations for the use of military force, right? Like they have the ability. I think there's like a degree here of like, if the like conflict is of a certain scale or something like that, then it's after like 60 or 90 days, like Congress has to continue to authorize the military presence being wherever it is. And that in practice has also been violated quite a lot. But it is also really not happening in this case. And you may have seen a bunch of sort of the different like votes coming out of the House and the Senate about like trying to force the Trump administration to like stop some of the things that it's doing, right? And those have failed for various political reasons, political wrangling, and also people just being annoying. But I think that what we should talk about with regard to like what those votes have done, what they would have done, is sort of like in the interim, right?
Mm-hmm.
Congress, the American public, still deserve to have some transparency into the conflict, right?
I mean, so just to clarify and jump in there, what you're discussing is the provision by which you can introduce troops for 60 to 90 days, and once that deadline is passed, you need to withdraw them or have some other authorization. That's the provision that you're talking about. Yeah. And we're not getting that.
We're not getting that. And I think it's important here at this point, like abstracting away for a moment, like from congressional authority versus executive authority. We're going to get into it again a little bit later, and sort of like what exactly are the like political ramifications, the political like reasons why things are not happening perhaps the way that they should. Even in the absence of that, right? Because we've had the absence of that before under like the last, I think, like 3 or 4 presidents, really. Maybe even like all of them, quite frankly, have violated this at one point or another.
Yeah. I mean, and you could say like expansive use of the authorization for the use of military force constitutes a lack of authorization or a lack of transparency.
Yeah. But even in those cases where you sort of lacked the like explicit congressional authorization, or Congress has been like unwilling or unable to sort of zealously guard its war-making prerogatives, you've still had a degree of transparency or at least consistency from administrations, right? Like even in situations where, like with Bush's invasion of Iraq, they were just totally fucking lying to everyone. At least they were like consistent and on message about their lie, right? And it like makes it easier. It made it easier in the long term for us to understand that that was a lie, and to hold at least some of the people who were responsible for those lies accountable, right? That's just not happening here at all, right? Like,
yes.
As far as I think like Megan and I can tell, like this conflict is mostly about like the Trump administration in its own sort of way trying to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons, right?
Yeah. And this makes sense in the context that Trump has always had a problem with the Iran nuclear deal that was entered into by the United States during the second Obama administration. So I kind of get that. That's about as consistent as things get in the Trump administration.
Yeah.
This is a problem that they have.
This is a thing that he like really harped on during the first administration. Like we'll come back to this in the second half of the episode, but like his administration did in fact certify twice that Iran was complying with the nuclear deal, twice in 2017, before in October of 2017, Trump seemingly unilaterally made the decision not to certify it going forward. And then they withdrew formally, I think in May of 2018, right? So we'll talk more about that, but like that's sort of like the only through line you can draw here. But the thing is that like that's not what Trump has really said in public, or his administration have said in public about like what exactly is going on here. And the explanation shifts every single time you ask someone, right? Like every single time you ask what's going on, you get a different answer. And like maybe all of them are true at once, but it really seems like they're just kind of making it up as they go along.
And it is incumbent upon them to communicate. Like I don't, not unlike the federal judiciary, I am not obligated to treat their claims as good faith ones. Like I don't have to presume regularity at this point. So I need them to proactively give us an explanation that is believable. We're not out here in our tinfoil hats when we say like we need a consistent answer in order for it to be reasonably believable.
Because when you like look at, when you say like we're trying to get rid of the nuclear program, right? Like assume that is the reason, right? Like just like fully buy the through line, right? Like, just for the sake of argument. If that were the case, the only thing that they would have done is once again blow up Iranian nuclear facilities, right? They did that like 6 to 8 months before they launched these attacks. But that's not what happened here, right? They relaunched strikes on Iran's supposed nuclear capabilities and also launched strikes against Iranian senior leadership, against other military capabilities. Many times they mistook like civilian facilities for military facilities. Like, there's just a whole bunch of stuff that happened here that like you simply would not do if your goal was solely with reference to their nuclear program. Like,
Yes.
you simply wouldn't be doing these things. And so
Yes.
administration officials, following on from people noticing that, have been like maddeningly inconsistent on what it is that they're actually trying to achieve here.
Absolutely. And so there's a new report out just today from the New York Times saying that there was an aerial strike on the home of former Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. And that made like maybe some sense. Like, well, okay, they're attacking senior leaders, whatever. They attacked Khomeini. But it turns out that that was actually a strike on the guard troops that were keeping him under house arrest because they thought they could install him as the new leader of the Iranian regime.
Just fucking crazy, right? Like,
it's really wild.
I saw the article.
Yeah, go ahead.
I saw the article and I was like, what? Like that was my literal reaction. What are they trying to do here, man? Like,
well, okay, so apparently, because I also, like, my recollection of this dude was not a pro-American recollection, but apparently his beliefs and policy priorities have shifted somewhat since he was president. And so they think he is going to be the best placed, or they did think he would be the best placed to be a friendly replacement for the outgoing, I guess, regime. Now, this is what this makes this so interesting, because if this is true, then obviously there's a regime change angle here. It's not just about diminishing nuclear capabilities. You could possibly make an argument that diminishing a country's nuclear capabilities includes decapitating a leadership structure that believes in obtaining nuclear weapons, but having the replacement lined up seems also very questionable.
And also, like, their plan was like, we're just gonna help him get out of the house and everything will magically fall into place.
It'll happen. Like, yeah. I don't know. I don't know that was the whole plan. Like, maybe there are parts of the plan, but it does seem a little like Wile E. Coyote. You're just gonna blow a hole in the building and everything will work itself out.
And then, of course, like, since the very early days of the conflict, right? Like, we've gotten additional potential reasons as to why the Trump administration did this. Like, they've said it's about opening the Strait of Hormuz, which, like, was only closed because they went in there in the first place. Like, they've told us that it's about liberating the Iranian people, which is a weird, like, thing to do when you accidentally bomb their schools and then pretend you didn't, right? There's just, again,
I think we have discussed this a few times in the past, and this isn't what this episode is about, but it's kind of a lack of theory of mind from the Trump administration where, the United States has a rally around the flag effect often when a president is involved in military action overseas. The thought that if you carpet bomb Tehran, they're not going to have the same response is pretty short-sighted. So I don't know what the plan was, and I cannot reverse engineer it from the actions that were taken.
And then I think also, like, there is an element here, I think, and this is maybe a little bit more tinfoil hat, right? Of like, they just bombed Iran because they wanted to distract from other things that were going on, right? Like, the Trump administration is wildly unpopular. And I think that they thought that no matter the reason behind why they were attacking Iran, that it would like make them more popular to do so, right?
They would get that rally around the flag effect.
They would get the rally around the flag effect.
It's wag the dog. It's not, this is not unprecedented.
There's been a substantial amount of like column inches, spilled ink in the press, right, about how they were also emboldened by their comparatively much more successful kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela, which one was like a very different operation. Two, like, is only successful in the comparative sense, in that like the exact same regime, like the same government is still in place, just without him at the top. And then also like still not all that much has changed with regards to like whether they'll be able to have like American ties to Venezuela and like economic integration and all that. And also like only really, even in like the most successful like rendering of it, like results in like going back to like the 2014 status quo before like Maduro takes over, right? Like there's nothing like fun.
Which
anyway,
is not all that different from actually what has turned out to happen in Iran. I mean, vis-a-vis the Hormuz Strait, you can absolutely make an argument that we are in a worse state than we were before February. But this is a regime that's really solidified. This is a regime that deals with deaths of senior officials regularly.
And also, I think as a additional point here, right, like a regime that is used to the Trump administration doing this to its senior leadership, right? Like the whole theory of the case here, like as we're sort of piecing it together from the inconsistencies in the Trump administration story here, was like deeply flawed from the beginning, right? And I think a big part of it is that the Trump administration hasn't been doing foreign policy properly. They haven't even really been doing foreign policy at all. They've been isolating Congress, violating the law, not being transparent or consistent with the American public, even consistent in terms of like why they're in their lies about why they're doing things, right? And I think that like this is sort of another instance of like the Trump administration sort of like getting lost in its own, like getting lost in the sauce, getting high on its own supply a little bit here, right? Like believing its own propaganda, where like we've talked about this before. Again, this is not the main point of this episode, but like Trump likes to pretend to solve problems, right? Like Donald Trump likes to create a problem by doing something stupid, right? Like his child separation policy at the border, his like blanket tariffs the first couple of weeks in office, right? Like pick a thing that he's done, right? He often creates these problems. And then like there's a public outcry, the stock market drops a few hundred points, and he like walks back like the worst parts of the stupid thing that he was doing. And then he's like, aha, I have solved this terrible problem that nobody thought I could solve, right? Like, I've solved this issue that like everyone was trying to solve for 20 years, but no one was able to. When in reality, he created the like most like the biggest part of the problem 2 weeks ago, right?
Yes, absolutely.
But the problem with that is that when you do that over and over again, you start to believe like, oh, I'm actually solving problems.
He's believing his own hype. Yeah.
And then when you cause a problem, like, or a problem happens that then you can't easily extricate yourself from, your whole, oh, I'm just going to walk this back, which is exactly what he's tried to do in Iran, right? Like, oh, we're just going to walk this back. We'll go back to the status quo. Doesn't fucking work, because you aren't the person who
everybody has to go along with that,
because you can't unilaterally fix the problem by stopping doing the thing that was causing it, right? Like that's where we find ourselves, and it's for a whole plethora of reasons. But in the second half of the episode, and I think this is probably a good place for us to take a bit of a break, we're going to talk about what Congress should be doing here, what more generally should happen, and some of the like broader, maybe like ideological underpinnings of American foreign policy that we should, like, in a much realer sense than we usually do on this on this podcast nowadays, return to tradition on. So we're going to take a break, and we'll see you in just a couple of seconds. Welcome back to Reject Modernity, Embrace Tradition. When we left you, we were talking about the maddening inconsistency of the Trump administration with regards to its actions in Iran, the fact that this is really a beast of their own making, but one that they cannot just easily extricate themselves from. And so in the back half here, we're going to talk a little bit more about not exactly solutions to this problem, not proximate solutions at least.
I don't know that this is solvable in the immediate sense.
Yeah, in the immediate term, I don't think so. But we want to talk about like what should have happened here, what should happen in the future, and we're going to talk about like some of the reasons why, like, we know that this isn't because Congress wants this to happen, and more about sort of internal politics of the United States. So we're going to do all of that in this back half, just to give you a little preview there. So Megan, why don't you start off with what really should have happened here in this case?
Broadly speaking, if you think the public will support you in a policy choice you are making, and prosecuting a war is a policy choice, you tell the truth about what's happening and what you're doing and why. You lay it on the table. You say, this is why your gas prices are higher. We think it's justified. This is why service members are in harm's way. We think it's justified. You make that clear, and then you have your upcoming midterm election and see what happens. And the obfuscation, the refusal to answer questions consistently, is creating that sort of lack of accountability that really, it makes it impossible for citizens to fairly evaluate this. If you believed what you were doing was right, you would have no problem telling people this is what we're doing and why.
Yeah,
and that's really what should be happening.
I think that that's sort of like the most important piece of this, right? Like, if they believe what they were doing was right, and they believe that they could persuade the American public of that, then they would be doing that, right? Like, they realize here that what they're doing is either like that they don't think they'll be able to get the American public behind it, right? Or they just don't actually really believe in what they're doing, and they were doing it for other reasons. And we'll not get into sort of what those tinfoil hat reasons might be.
No, I don't think that's helpful. I don't think it's helpful to speculate about what else is going on that they could be trying to distract us from, because on its own, it is not a good idea. We don't even need to get into the rest of it.
Yeah,
on its face, this is bad.
On its face, this is a bad idea. You shouldn't start dumb wars of choice that you have no real idea of how they're going to end.
As we love to say on this podcast, dumb, bad, and wrong.
Dumb, bad, and wrong. The long story short is, like, if they thought their war was justified, if they thought that, like, the American public could be brought around, if they thought they could convince Congress that this was a necessary military action, they would have done those things. If they thought that the war was justified, they would have let Congress vote on it, and vote on it in a way that, like, actually reflects their opinions, right?
Yes, exactly. Make this a free vote. We don't really have this concept of free votes in the United States, but one that you're not going to hold against somebody. How about that? One that isn't going to make you say, well, all right, if you vote this way, I'll endorse your challenger. That's not letting Congress engage in oversight.
Yeah. Also, in terms of Congress engaging in oversight, show up to the hearings that Congress is holding and just answer fucking basic questions about what's going on.
Don't be an asshole. Don't be a burn book. Like, that's the point of this.
Don't be a gigantic fucking asshole about it, right? Like, there is an argument to be made. I think Megan and I would both disagree with that argument, but there's an argument to be made that this operation was actually justified, just to like fully steelman the argument.
Oh,
right?
the steeliest of steelmen.
To steelman the argument, you can make the argument that Iran absolutely should not have access to a nuclear weapon under any circumstances, that the sunset clauses in the JCPOA, the Iran deal, were going to make it so that eventually Iran was going to be able to get a nuclear weapon, that Iran is enough of a pariah state that they would use it if they got it. And so this military action right now, even like accepting the possibility of negotiations down the road, that this military action was necessary and justified. Like, that's the steelman version of what has happened here, right? Make that argument, right? Make the argument and try to get the American public behind you, right?
Or at least just Congress. Like, there's an argument I think I hear floating around like, well, it's classified. It's like, all right, fortunately, we have committees in Congress who are supposed to deal with these things. Have a meeting in the SCIF. Make sure nobody brings in their phones, because I've heard the administration has a problem with this. Have a meeting where you discuss that classified intelligence you can't show the rest of us, and then have Congress vote or not. But just the administration saying that this war is justified, quite frankly, isn't good enough. And it is ignoring the structure of checks and balances on which our system is founded.
And I think even like fully acknowledging, like, even if I were to buy every single one of the Trump administration's arguments here, if I were to steelman the shit out of the argument, right, that we should have done this, even merely consulting Congress is going to lead to you making better decisions. It's not going to lead to you necessarily making faster decisions, right? Which is, it seems, what the Trump administration really wanted to do here. And there are circumstances in which the decision needs to be made fast, and that's why you don't consult Congress beforehand, but inform them after, right? That 48-hour period within which you need to notify the Gang of Eight, right? But this isn't one of those circumstances, right? Like, they keep telling us that there was no evidence that it is. Right? They keep telling us that there was an imminent threat, and then refusing to demonstrate that there was an imminent threat, right? Again, just like, even in like the most steel version of what happened here, consulting with Congress would have like made them make better decisions about what to do here. And you could have avoided perhaps some of the most insane and stupid things that happened here. Like, we're at the front end of this back half, we're like literally just asking for the bare minimum required by the law, right? Like, we're not even
the bar is on the floor, man.
We're not asking the Trump administration at this particular moment. We're not saying that the Trump administration shouldn't have been evil. We're just saying they shouldn't have been stupid. Because, like, that's what happened here. They're being both evil and stupid at the same time.
Accept stupidity as long as you're transparent. I will accept stupidity as long as you go and tell Congress about it.
Dear God, the fucking bar is on the absolute goddamn floor right now. My God. Okay.
Okay, now let's raise the bar a tiny bit.
Yeah, to raise the bar a tiny bit, right? There's absolutely an element here of the Trump administration is 100% leaning on members of the House and the Senate behind the scenes to get them to continue to vote against war powers resolutions that would like stop them from doing like basically everything what they're doing. Yeah. You can tell this for a number of reasons, right? The first is that these are entirely party line votes, basically, with only like one or two of the most conservative Democrats crossing the aisle in a couple of cases to vote against certain versions of these war powers resolutions. But the clearest example that we've gotten of it thus far is Senator Cassidy from Louisiana, Megan's former state when she was in college, switching his vote to vote for one of these resolutions, the first one that's actually passed in the Senate because of him switching his vote, right? After he lost his primary, I think, 2 days ago now? No, over the weekend.
Yeah, it was
right?
a couple days.
I
think it was a Monday, weirdly.
Louisiana is weird and does their primaries on like a Saturday or something like that for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway.
Because it's a day off for folks. Actually, it's not that crazy.
But regardless, Cassidy lost his primary. There are other reasons why Cassidy lost his primary, mostly because he voted to convict Trump after the January 6th.
His second impeachment. Right? Yeah, he voted to convict in Trump's second impeachment.
In his second impeachment. So that's one of the biggest reasons. I have no particular sympathy for Senator Cassidy, right? Like, he is a doctor and voted for RFK for Health and Human Services Secretary, and that's just completely fucking unforgivable. But the fact that he switched his vote fucking immediately after losing this primary shows that the thing that he was worried about was potential blowback from the Trump administration, from Republican Party primary voters who are very much still in Trump's sort of thrall, right? I think you can't really get a clearer demonstration of that other than if a Republican member of Congress or the Senate were to come out and say, the reason that I'm not voting for this is because the president doesn't want me to, right? And I think, you see again, Thomas Massey in Kentucky lost his primary yesterday, and he's, I think, not voted for these war powers resolutions, but is a critic of the Trump administration, specifically on the Epstein files issue. I wouldn't be surprised to see him change his vote if it comes before the House, right? But him losing after being a Trump critic, right, is another sort of sign, right, that this is still absolutely very much Trump's Republican Party, right? And the reason that Republican members of the House, members of the Senate are not voting for these resolutions to curtail his power is because they're afraid of him. They're just afraid of him. And they're not doing so for political reasons, not because they think that his decisions are actually justified here in any sort of meaningful sense of the term.
And we've talked about this in a number of senses, and I just taught a class on the differences between parliamentary systems and presidential systems. And, we talk a lot about checks and balances and the concept of a presidential system where you have a separate executive and a separate legislature, and they're supposed to restrict each other's power. And the question that comes up now is, okay, well, what do you do if your legislature won't do that? This system breaks down when you have a legislature that is more partisan than it is aligned with its prerogatives as an institution.
Yeah, this is another one of those situations where the founding generation didn't see political parties coming, and so the system that they set up, which was agnostic to faction, doesn't weather the storm particularly well. I think even more broadly than all of this, though, I don't think there's that much more to say about the sort of political wrangling here. It's annoying, right? We'll get into it maybe just a tiny bit at the end. But I think there's an element here of to raise the bar further, right? The Trump administration just shouldn't have been able to do any of this, right? There's an element of, yes, historically speaking, foreign policy is considered much more clearly from a constitutional perspective, the domain of the president, but not directly when he's fucking it up like this, right? Starting wars of choice is bad, right? Even if we absolutely steelman the shit out of this argument, this is still a consequence of Trump's own actions here. This has been a slow-moving disaster that has led us to this point, beginning with Trump tearing up the Iran nuclear deal in 2017, 2018. After, again, mind you, his own administration had certified, twice confirmed, that Iran was complying with the terms of that deal. And I think, quite importantly, I'm just going to say a little bit here about what the provisions of that deal actually were. I think people don't seem to know what they were because like it just wasn't enforced for very long, and like the media environment around it was just so like completely divorced from what the deal actually did.
It was completely process based and not at all about the actual content.
Yeah. So, a couple of things here. I've just written some notes about like what was actually in the framework. Iran made a number of commitments as part of this deal, and I think I should also note here that like the deal was not only between the United States and Iran. There were also like other countries that were involved here. There was the UK, there was France, China, Germany, Russia was on it, right? Like this was a really comprehensive international framework for Iran.
It was huge, and we're not going to be able to do anything like this ever again.
No, we're not, because like the geopolitical environment has changed. The United States and Russia have a dramatically different relationship today. The United States and China even have a different relationship than they had a decade ago, right? Like this was it. This was like the opportunity to solve this in a diplomatic way, and it just didn't happen, right? Or like it did happen, and then Trump fucking tore it up. So Iran's commitments as part of the deal, they agreed to reduce their uranium enrichment capacity by like roughly 2/3, right? So the amount of uranium that they could actually enrich for the purposes of, at least they said, right, like nuclear power, right? They agreed to cap uranium enrichment at well below weapons grade level. You need to have a certain degree of uranium enrichment to make nuclear bombs. It's different from the nuclear fuel that you use in nuclear reactors. We won't get into the details.
Watch Chernobyl. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, it agreed to reduce its stockpile of enriched uranium by as much as 98%, right? Just to the level that would be needed to run those nuclear power plants, as opposed to the amount that you might want to put into weapons, right? It agreed to redesign several, or at least its biggest nuclear reactor to prevent the production of plutonium, which you can also use in nuclear bombs. And it agreed to basically not reprocess spent fuel, which is another thing that can sort of lead to like weapons development or like other problems with nuclear power and that kind of thing. They submitted to verification and monitoring procedures through the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, inspections over the course of the time that the deal was actually in force. Those inspectors spent, I think, if I'm remembering this number off the top of my head correctly, I did not take the notes down, unfortunately, something like 600 man days in country. So like over the course of the roughly like 2 years that the deal was actually in force, they spent the equivalent of like 600 person days in country verifying compliance with the deal. They agreed to implement additional protocols allowing for tons of like actually quite intrusive inspections to make sure that they like weren't doing any of the things they were prohibited from doing. And they agreed to provide inspectors access to like the full nuclear supply chain. So mines, mills, centrifuge production, the power plants themselves, everything, right? And in return, basically, the US, EU, United Nations agreed to lift nuclear-related sanctions, including on oil and their financial sector. Relief was phased in as Iran met those commitments and as they were verified by those independent third-party monitors. And then provisions in the law, in the agreement, called snapback provisions, allowed those sanctions to be reimposed if Iran violated the deal. There were sunset clauses in the deal. Key restrictions on uranium enrichment lasted a decade. Stuff about centrifuge and R&D lasted a bit longer. And those additional protocol inspections, on the other hand, were meant to become permanent under Iranian law. They were amended later to become permanent under Iranian law. So that's sort of the like broad contours of this deal. Again, the Trump administration themselves certified twice that it was working. And even if you think that those sunset clauses were in some way unacceptable, you could have always renegotiated the deal later. You could have, created new frameworks, right? You could have done anything really other than just completely torn up the deal and had Iran
and
go
replace
right
it with nothing.
Yeah, and replace it with nothing and had Iran go right back to doing what it was doing before the deal was in place, which is exactly what we didn't want them to do, which is why the deal was there, right? So, like, that happened in the first days of the first Trump administration, right? Like the first half of
and he campaigned on it. It was very clear.
It was super clear that he was going to do this, right? Like, I can't really find like a rational reason for it other than he just like didn't trust that Obama negotiated a good deal and like couldn't be bothered.
I do think that's what it was.
And just like
unfortunately
couldn't be fucking bothered to check. Like just wouldn't believe his own advisors, wouldn't believe the IEA or whatever. That's the first sort of note in this like symphony of this slow moving disaster, right? Mm-hmm. Then there's obviously we're doing some oversimplification here because the podcast is already going to be longer than we wanted it to be today. But we're skipping over a ton of stuff. But the next thing that you get basically is Trump launching a drone strike after rising tensions for a while that kills one of the top Iranian leaders, Qasem Soleimani, in 2020. Now, I think people have like memory hold this for whatever reasons, but like before COVID,
I know what reason.
Before COVID became COVID,
timing wise,
before COVID became COVID, right? Everyone who followed the news and politics and like international developments was basically like, damn, like Trump assassinating a senior member of Iran's leadership, like this is going to be like the international story going like for the rest of 2020. Like there was a whole bunch of like worries that like we were actually going to get involved in a war with Iran as a result of this.
Ironically, COVID might have saved us from that one.
Yeah, like Iran did retaliate, right? But also COVID hit Iran earlier than it hit a lot of other places. If you sort of were paying attention and like tracking global case counts this time, Iran had one of the first like really big spikes of COVID outside of China, possibly because of the relationships that Iran has with China and sort of more travelers going between the places. But like everyone who's like, who could have imagined that Trump would get us involved in a misadventure in the Middle East? It's like, fucking, I could. Like, that was obvious that he was going to do that, right?
And this is why I have no sympathy for the people who, honest to God, believed that this administration was not going to get us into another war specifically in the Middle East. Like, I understand that when campaigning, Trump says a lot of things that are contradictory, and you can choose to believe any of them. But the probability of that one being true versus its opposite, I don't know, bro.
Look at what he did the first fucking time, right? Like, anyway.
But Kamala campaigned with Liz Cheney, so they're the same.
Yeah, obviously they're the same. Just for any listeners who believe that Kamala Harris would be doing what Trump is doing right now, fuck right off. We don't need you listening to the podcast. Frankly, I think you're just as dumb as the people who voted for Donald Trump. And I don't really know what to tell you other than that. Anyway.
Yeah. So back to our broader point, which is that, yes, the president has pretty broad foreign policy power, but Congress and we, the American people, also have some oversight authority.
And I think the important point especially with respect to Congress here is that there were so many opportunities over the course of a decade for Congress to step in and say anything about this, for Congress to do anything that would have broken us from this sort of path dependency, for Congress to take its role as, its role in foreign policy even like a tiny bit seriously. There was so many opportunities where Congress could have just quietly shunted us off this path that has led to where we are today, where, again, it's possibly not the worst case scenario we could have been involved in, right? Like the Trump administration could have decided to send in like a large
Ground
ground
troops.
invasion into Iran, right?
It
Like
could be worse.
it could be worse, right? But right, it's like it's the job of Congress, it's the job of the American people, it's the job of like every fucking body out here, right? To not let the president just completely fuck up foreign policy, right? And over the course of the last decade, we have not allowed that to happen, right? Like we've not done the work that was necessary to stop this from occurring. Like I think perhaps the critical insight here, or maybe the critical, not insight, just piece that I want people to think about is like we had 4 years of Joe Biden in the White House, right? 4 years where he was trying to renegotiate the nuclear deal with Iran. And at every turn, Iran was basically saying like, well, how do we know that if we renegotiate this deal, you're not going to fucking renege on it again, right?
Yeah.
And the way that
totally reasonable.
Which again, from the Iranian perspective, a completely reasonable concern because Trump absolutely fucking would have reneged on it, right? But if at any point, any like critical mass of Republicans, just like a few of them, had said, you know, actually, we're willing to do the work to make this an actual treaty rather than like a non-binding executive agreement, it would have been so much harder for Trump to stop complying with the terms of the deal, to like re-implement sanctions, to do any of the stuff that he's done that's led us to this point, right? Like, if at any point, like just like 10 Republicans in the Senate, like a few Republicans in the House had agreed, like had stopped fucking playing politics with it, right? And like actually allowed this thing to be a real treaty, then we could have avoided this. We could have avoided $6.50 gas. We could have avoided thousands of Iranians being killed. We could have avoided the regime being further entrenched. We could have avoided the global geopolitical ramifications, which we don't actually know all of what they're going to be yet, right?
Like, yeah, we know we weakened our ties with our European allies over this. We already know that.
And I think one of the things here that people got to remember is that, like, you know, Iran has a long memory about these things, right? You might think, oh, well, they haven't retaliated quite as strongly.
Pissed off about Mossadegh. Are you kidding me?
Like, you'd be like, they might not have, that you're thinking to yourself now, well, they didn't retaliate as bad as I thought they would, right? Like, reporting recently has indicated that they've salvaged a lot of their like missile capability, their Air Force's capability, like hangars and stuff and silos and things that were buried. They've been able to like re-up their capacity there. Give it a couple of years and there's gonna be some retaliation. And people are going to be like, why would Iran do this? And it's going to be like, it's because we bombed them 2 years ago and the regime has a long memory. Like, and that's like only one of the most predictable geopolitical consequences that's going to come out of this whole clusterfuck, right? Like, there could be something happening 10 years from now where the United States is like actually saying something big is going to happen with like some like thing with China or Russia or some other sort of belligerent state. And our European allies aren't going to believe us about it. The people who it's about to happen to aren't going to believe us about it. Like, this kind of already happened in 2022, right? With regards to Ukraine, right? Like, our European allies, the Ukrainian state, they were like, oh, we don't think Russia's about to do a ground invasion, right? Turns out we were really fucking right about that, right? And like, one of these days it's going to happen that something like this is going to happen again. And we're going to have like Boy Who Cried Wolfed ourselves into nobody fucking believing us, right? And it's going to be like, well, how did that happen? Why didn't anyone believe us when we said this thing was about to happen? And it's going to be like, well, the Trump administration 5 years ago did this thing that everyone was like, what the fuck, man? And then couldn't explain themselves afterwards. Like, the whole thing is just like, there's so many situations, so many moments where we could have stopped ourselves from getting into this situation, getting to where we are now. We just haven't done so. Haven't done so.
No. And it's so deeply frustrating because Congress should be taking responsibility. And quite frankly, not that it's in any way the interest of the Trump administration right now. As we keep saying, if you think that you actually do have the authority to do this without any sort of war powers resolution, etc., let Congress pass a resolution and litigate it. Don't just say, oh, you can't make me, and then be done. This is the like, I'm not touching you, kind of like argument here where it's like, oh no, like it's too cute by half. We're always just going to be like, well, we don't really have to, and then just move on. No, let's figure it out. If you think you're right, let's figure it out.
Yeah. And I think this is sort of like the final, more like ideological orientation point that we wanted to make, which is that like the United States needs to like just do fucking foreign policy again. Like they actually need to engage in negotiation. They actually need to like, they need to stop trying to strong arm the entire world into doing what we want.
This is embarrassing. And I talk to people who are more conservative who say, I like that we are perceived as strong. And I'm like, we're not perceived as strong. We're perceived as ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's embarrassing to send Ivanka Trump into a conversation with the chair of the European Council. Like, I don't
remind me, my fucking God.
Yeah. So like, and nothing against her. She's just not qualified to be in that room. Why are we sending a knife to a gunfight?
I have other things against her, but whatever. We don't have to talk about those.
Yeah, on this particular point.
In this particular point,
it's we send people who are manifestly unqualified. We do it on our diplomatic corps in our practice of sending high dollar donors to European capitals rather than actual trained diplomats. We treat it as the
problem with the show The Diplomat, like having her be the ambassador to the UK, and like as if anyone would fucking think that the ambassador to the UK is a potential like presidential material or like vice presidential material. Second, the person we send to be the ambassador to the United Kingdom, it's like the cushiest, dumbest diplomatic post in the entire diplomatic service.
There's this throwaway line, because there's no language requirement. There's this throwaway line where like the house manager is like, "Have you brought your own art?" And her husband's like, "We don't have an art collection. We were civil servants." Like, what are you talking about? And but that's the thing. In 4 other countries, that is like the top flight professional, I have been doing this for decades job. And the presumption is that for the Americans, it's going to be some rich mucky muck. And
just to give this, and this isn't like a party specific thing either. Both parties
do it. Both parties do it.
The guy who is currently the U.S. ambassador to the United Kingdom is named Warren Stevens, and he is the chairman, president, and chief executive officer of Stevens Incorporated, a privately held investment bank. And his qualification seems to be that he donated $6 million to the Trump campaign.
Hey, well, don't even get me started on the U.S. ambassador to France right now.
I'll feel free not to get you started on it. But long story short, like, we need to do literally any fucking foreign policy anymore, right?
Take it seriously.
I'm sure that the people, if we have any people in the diplomatic corps who listen to this silly little podcast, I'm sorry you find yourself in this situation. I'm sorry that you find yourself in this situation where like the thing you wanted to do has been like just completely taken over by fucking idiots. But like, to your point, Megan, right? Like that you said earlier of we're not perceived as strong, we're perceived as ridiculous, right? Like essentially the United States is treated like diplomatically around the world, sort of like a big like grizzly bear, right? Or like maybe like some other type of like large buffoonish animal, right? Like you don't expect smart decision making from the bear. But you know that the bear is dangerous, and so you treat it with like a 10-foot pole, right?
Mm-hmm. The United States treat it with what looks like respect.
Yeah, the United States is a bit like a bear that has climbed into someone's car in Yosemite, right? And like you don't really know how to ask the bear to leave. Like the bear is, like dangerous to you. It could cause problems if you antagonize it. And so you treat it with a degree of deference, right? And the bear, in its bareness, might perceive that you think of it as a strong, respectable character, when really you're just like, get the fuck out of my car, man. So like, that's what's going on here. That's what's going on. I think that I've actually stumbled into what I think is a really good analogy here. In the same way that we are a bear, there are other bears in the diplomatic arena. Or at least there are other idiots in the diplomatic arena, right? One of the things that you'll often ask, or you'll hear people ask when you talk about like, well, why not just design trash cans that the bears can't get into, right? Like, the response that you get is, well, there's like a substantial degree of overlap between the smartest bears and the dumbest humans, right? There's a substantial degree of overlap between like the smartest members of the Trump administration and the dumbest members of other diplomatic service corps. And so you also find yourselves in situations where like the Iranian regime and the Trump administration are just fucking talking past each other, right? Like, the Iranian regime is also, there are people in there who are dumb and annoying and like are making ridiculous requests and assertions that the United States is never going to agree to. And so it's just like no one's going to get anywhere with any of that. And so this is like really a call for the entire world just to engage in diplomacy again, but specifically for the United States to engage in some actual fucking foreign policy. Like, there used to be an adage, I don't know if this is actually a real quote or if it's apocryphal, came from Arthur Vandenberg, the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in 1948, when the United States was discussing like what NATO was going to look like, what the Marshall Plan was going to look like. Vandenberg was a Republican, Truman was a Democrat. Famously, Truman also fucking hated Republicans, right? Like when you run like sentiment analyses of like presidents' writings and stuff, like you have to like have a Truman control because of how much he fucking hated Republicans.
He's the every Republican is an affront to God kind of
exactly. I'm not joking, right? Like, I saw a talk at UCLA like a year ago where someone like did this thing where he was like, oh, we're like measuring affective partisanship in presidential speeches or whatever. And he like had to exclude Truman from the analysis because it was like Truman hated Republicans so fucking much that he like totally blew up the entire analysis, right? But anyway, all of that is by way of saying that the quote is, politics stops at the water's edge. And much like the world has changed in ways that mean that Congress can no longer authorize every single one of the United States military operations, nor necessarily should it be expected to, right? We can't say that politics can entirely be left at the water's edge anymore, especially with sort of in the Trump era, this globalization of politics, where you have like Trumpist type candidates, where you have people working or not working with each other around the world because of not like the sort of communist capitalist binary, but because of the like, you know, sort of like right-wing nationalist versus like liberal cosmopolitan binary, right? Like you can't
a professional versus amateur binary at a certain point.
At a certain point, right? Like you can't leave politics at the water's edge entirely. But like, damn, man, we've like fucking got to get back to leaving a little bit of politics at the water's edge and actually doing some like real goddamn foreign policy, some like real fucking diplomacy, like finally some good fucking food again. Like we got to get back to an era where not every single one of our like foreign policy decisions are seemingly driven by like the dumbest domestic political concerns known to man.
Yes. Yep. It is not as my thinking about the quote, politics stops the water's edge. That was a call to the political minority at the time. And this is more of a call to the political majority to make smarter decisions on behalf of all Americans and quite frankly, on behalf of everyone. Because the things that we are doing are not defensible. And if you could defend them, please do so.
Yeah, and long term, they are going to cause so many more problems. And this is, I think, a good place to end, right, with sort of a call back to accountability, right? Like, there's a degree here to which you have to hold the Trump administration accountable, not just for the things that have already happened on its watch and the, like, extremely foreseeable negative consequences of its actions, but, like, the potential ramifications down the road here. Like, obviously this, I feel somewhat uncomfortable with this because like it opens the door to like every single decision from any potential president in the future being questioned on the grounds of this might cause negative consequences in the future, right? And you don't want, like, every time you read a fucking history book, it's like, well, this culture brutally punished its military leaders for failure, and so it lost the war, whereas this one rewarded them for success, and therefore they won the war, right? Or whatever. There's oversimplification, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
But to a certain extent, when it's so obvious that the decisions you are making are potentially disastrous, when they have already led to disastrous consequences, and when it is eminently predictable, coming up with my own legal standard here, right? When it is eminently predictable that there are going to be future negative consequences as a result of those decisions, it should be the prerogative of Congress, the people, the judiciary, whoever, to hold those people accountable for like just like under the doctrine of like the creation of risk or something, right? Like creating new doctrines for myself right here on the podcast. Like, Trump has created so many potential consequences for the United States here, very few of which are positive or even neutral. And there has to be some way of holding the people in the administration who made those decisions accountable for them, even if we can't pinpoint an exact thing right now that has already happened as a result. But until we manage to do those things, maybe we can start just with the like going into a committee hearing and not being an asshole about it, right? Until we manage to do the rest of those things, I have been Clayton Becker.
I have been Megan Cox.
We will see you guys on the next one.